The document was never supposed to see daylight. A single memo, buried beneath layers of judicial privilege, hidden in the archives of the Supreme Court. One signature. One decision. One betrayal that would shake America to its core. Clarence. Thomas, the conservative stalwart of the Supreme Court, had just single-handedly authorized the transfer of $2.7 billion in American taxpayer funds to overseas projects during the worst economic crisis in decades. Money that was supposed to rebuild crumbling schools in Detroit, fix water systems in Flint, fund veterans' hospitals in communities where heroes slept in their cars. Instead, with a single pen stroke, it vanished overseas. No congressional approval, no public debate, no transparency. Just gone. While Americans stood in food lines while families chose between medicine and meals, while teachers bought supplies with money from their second jobs, Clarence Thomas signed away their future, and he thought no one would ever find out. But Pam Bondi found the memo, and what she discovered wasn't just a financial scandal. It was a calculated betrayal orchestrated by the one man Americans trusted to protect the Constitution, revealing a shadow network that reached from the highest court in the land to the darkest corners of foreign influence. Now, Bondi is about to expose everything in a congressional hearing that will change America forever. And Thomas? He has no idea what's coming. The air in the congressional hearing room was electric with tension. Cameras positioned strategically captured every angle, every expression, every subtle shift in the room's energy. This wasn't just another political performance. This was the day of reckoning. Pam Bondi walked in without fanfare. No dramatic entrance, no entourage, just a woman in a precisely tailored navy suit carrying a single leather portfolio. Her steps were measured, deliberate, like a prosecutor approaching the bench with evidence that would break open a case. Because that's exactly what she was. Several seats away, behind a polished mahogany table, sat Justice Clarence Thomas. For 3 decades he had been the untouchable icon of conservative jurisprudence. The man whose opinion shaped American law, whose dissents became rallying cries, whose very presence on the bench symbolized the power of the judicial branch. Today, though, something was different. The customary confidence in his posture was replaced by a subtle rigidity. His eyes, normally calm and assured, darted occasionally toward Bondi's portfolio. He knew something was wrong but couldn't yet see the full picture. The gallery was packed with journalists, their laptops open, fingers hovering over keyboards. Congressional staffers whispered to each other, exchanging theories about what might unfold. On the panel, senators from both parties shifted in their seats, aware they were about to witness something unprecedented. Committee Chairman Senator James Marshall called the hearing to order with a sharp bang of his gavel. This emergency oversight hearing will now come to order. The committee calls Pam Bondi to provide testimony regarding alleged judicial impropriety related to the international funding authorization signed by Justice Clarence Thomas on April the 17th. Bondi approached the microphone, her expression betraying nothing. No nervousness, no uncertainty, just the calm determination of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm here today because the American people deserve to know when their trust has been violated and their money has been misappropriated without their consent." She opened her portfolio and removed a single document, holding it up so the cameras could capture it clearly. This is a judicial authorization transferring $2.7 billion in emergency domestic funds to international projects, signed by Justice Thomas on April 17th. This transfer occurred without congressional oversight, without public disclosure and in direct contradiction to the emergency domestic spending bill passed just 3 weeks earlier. Thomas shifted in his chair. A subtle movement, but the cameras caught it. The first crack in the facade. Bondi continued. But this document isn't just about money. It's about a fundamental betrayal of public trust. And, as I will demonstrate today, it's about something far more disturbing. A calculated effort to circumvent the will of the American people and funnel their tax dollars into projects that directly benefit private interests connected to members of our highest court. The room went completely silent. Even the most seasoned political reporters stopped typing, their fingers frozen above their keyboards. Today, Bondi said, her voice dropping just enough to make everyone lean forward, I will show you exactly where this money went, who profited from it, and why Justice Thomas had a personal interest in making sure this transfer happened without public scrutiny. Thomas's expression remained stoic, but a muscle in his jaw tightened visibly. He hadn't expected this. He had expected procedural questions, technical arguments about judicial authority, perhaps even some partisan theater, but not this, not evidence. Not specifics, not the truth laid bare for all to see. The battle lines were drawn. Pam Bondi was about to take on one of the most powerful men in America, and she was just getting started. Let's begin with the money. Trail, Bondi said, signaling to an aide who switched on a large display screen. A complex network of financial flows appeared, color-coded arrows connecting entities across continents. This visualization represents the movement of American taxpayer dollars following Justice Thomas's authorization. She pointed to the starting point, a block labeled U.S. Emergency Domestic Fund, then traced the path outward. $840 million transferred to the Global Infrastructure Initiative, which then dispersed amounts ranging from $50 to $120 million to 7 different international development corporations. She clicked a button, highlighting one corporation in red. This entity, Hartwick International, received $117 million in interesting, considering their last 3 projects in Southeast Asia remain incomplete after 5 years, with approximately 60% of previously allocated funds unaccounted for. A murmur spread through the room. Bondi let it ripple before continuing. But the real question isn't just where the money went, it's why it went there at all. She pulled out another document. This is a transcript from a closed-door Supreme Court administrative session 3 weeks before the transfer authorization. In it, Justice Thomas argues that the court has extraordinary authority to redirect funds in cases where strategic international interests supersede domestic appropriations. She looked directly at Thomas. Justice Thomas, can you explain what strategic international interests were so urgent that they justified taking billions from American communities during an economic crisis? Thomas leaned toward his microphone. The court has the constitutional authority to review and address matters that affect international agreements and treaty obligations. This was a routine legal interpretation, not a policy decision. Bondi's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Routine? Let's talk about routine, Justice Thomas. She motioned to the aide again. The screen switched to images. A crumbling elementary school in Detroit, its ceiling caved in, exposed wiring hanging above empty desks. A veterans medical center in Arizona. Patients in wheelchairs lined up outside because the facility couldn't accommodate them all. A small town in West Virginia where residents collected rainwater because their municipal system was contaminated with lead. These were the designated recipients of the Emergency Domestic Fund you redirected, Bondi said, her voice taking on an edge of controlled anger. American children, American veterans, American citizens, all waiting for help that never came because those resources were sent overseas instead. She clicked to the next slide. And if we're discussing routine, perhaps you could explain this. The screen showed a luxury resort on a pristine beach, palm trees swaying against turquoise waters. This is the Hartwick International Corporate retreat in the Maldives, where they hosted their board meeting just 3 weeks after receiving their portion of the funds you authorized. Another click. A spreadsheet appeared. And these are the Hartwick International board members who attended. I've highlighted the third name on the list, Leonard Price Horowitz, husband of Elizabeth Horowitz, who serves as trustee for the Thomas Family Foundation. If you're finding this information as shocking as we are, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on this breaking story. We're just getting started with the revelations. Thomas's composure slipped, if only for a moment. His eyebrows twitched downward, his lips pressed together more firmly. He hadn't expected this level of detail, this precise connection. "That's a coincidental association at best," he said, his voice not quite as steady as before. "The Thomas Family Foundation has no connection to my judicial decisions." Bondi nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Coincidences happen, so let's look at more coincidences." For the next several minutes, she methodically outlined connections between each of the 7 international corporations that received funds and various associates or family members of Supreme Court justices. Business partnerships, board positions, advisory roles, speaking engagements with generous honorariums, each link documented, each connection verified. But perhaps the most troubling coincidence, Bondi said, her pace slowing deliberately, involves the final recipient of these funds. The screen showed a corporate logo, Meridian Global Partners. Meridian received $362 million from your authorization, Justice Thomas. Within 48 hours, they initiated a series of property acquisitions in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. She paused. Property acquisitions that included a 200-acre development previously owned by a real estate consortium that had been struggling to find buyers for over 3 years. She produced another document, holding it up for the cameras. "This is a financial disclosure form from 2 years ago, showing that you and Mrs. Thomas held an investment stake in that very same consortium, a stake that would have resulted in significant losses had that property remained unsold." The room erupted. Journalists frantically typed on their keyboards. Photographers' cameras clicked in rapid succession. Several committee members leaned forward, expressions ranging from shock to vindication. Chairman Marshall banged his gavel, repeatedly. "Order! We will have order!" As the room gradually quieted, Thomas sat perfectly still, his expression now completely unreadable. The defense he had prepared, the technical legal arguments about judicial authority and constitutional interpretation, had just been rendered meaningless. This wasn't about legal theory anymore. This was about money, connections, personal benefit. Bondi waited until she had everyone's full attention again. "Justice Thomas, would you like to explain how your personal financial interests played no role in your decision to authorize this transfer?" Thomas reached for his water glass, but his hand paused halfway there. For perhaps the first time in his decades-long career, Clarence Thomas appeared to be at a loss for words. And that's when Bondi revealed she was just getting started. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "what I've shown so far only accounts for approximately half of the transferred funds. With your permission, I'd like to continue following the money." "Before we continue," Bondi said, her voice taking on a new tone, quieter, more measured, yet somehow more intense, "I want to make something absolutely clear. This investigation isn't about partisan politics. It isn't about conservative versus liberal jurisprudence. It's about something far more fundamental. She turned, facing Justice Thomas directly. "It's about the sacred trust between the American people and those who hold power in their name." The room was completely silent now. Even the usual rustling of papers had ceased. "Justice Thomas, for 30 years, you have positioned yourself as the ultimate defender of constitutional originalism. You've written passionately about judicial restraint, about strict interpretation, about the dangers of an activist court that overreaches its authority." She picked up a book, one of Thomas's own published collections of opinions and essays. "You wrote, and I quote, 'The judiciary must remain the interpreter of law, not its creator. When judges substitute their preferences for the constitutional choices made by elected officials, they exercise power that the Constitution does not give them.'" She closed the book with a gentle snap. Those are powerful words, important words, words that millions of Americans believed you meant. Thomas remained silent, but his eyes never left hers. "And yet," Bondi continued, "with a single signature, you did exactly what you warned against. You didn't interpret law, you created it. You didn't respect constitutional boundaries. You crossed them. You didn't defer to elected officials. You overrode them." She returned to the display screen, bringing up a new document. "This is Executive Order 14072, signed by the President, specifically prohibiting the redirection of emergency domestic funds without congressional approval. It was issued in response to the economic crisis, to ensure that relief reached American communities first." Another document appeared beside it. "And this is your authorization, signed 3 weeks later, directly countermanding that order." Bondi turned back to the committee. "The legal question here isn't complicated. Justice Thomas had no authority to redirect these funds. None. This wasn't a judicial ruling on a case before the court. This wasn't a constitutional interpretation in a legal dispute. This was an administrative action, taken unilaterally without jurisdiction." She faced Thomas again. "But the more important question isn't legal at all. It's ethical. It's about why a justice who has built his entire career on judicial restraint would suddenly abandon those principles when billions of dollars and personal connections were involved. Then came the moment that would be replayed on news networks for weeks to come." Bondi walked slowly toward Thomas, stopping just a few feet from his table. "Justice Thomas, Americans have trusted you for decades. They've defended you against critics. They've believed in your integrity, even when they disagreed with your opinions. They deserve to know, was it all just words? Was your commitment to judicial restraint, to constitutional boundaries, to the rule of law, was it real? Or was it convenient rhetoric that could be abandoned when personal interests were at stake?" For several seconds, Thomas didn't respond. The cameras captured every micro-expression, the slight flare of his nostrils, the barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers pressed against the table just a fraction harder. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Bondi, you are presenting a series of circumstances and connections without context. You are implying causation where there is merely correlation. This is precisely the kind of political theater that undermines public confidence in our institutions." "It" was the response of a jurist, measured and technical. But Bondi wasn't finished. "Then allow me to provide some context, Justice Thomas." She signaled to her aide once more. The screen changed to show an email, its header information clearly visible. From Leonard P. Horowitz to Elizabeth Horowitz. Date, April 10th. 1 week. Before the authorization. Subject, SC Development. The email was brief but devastating. Clarence confirmed today. Transfer will proceed next week. Inform the Meridian Board they can move forward with acquisition plans. This needs to remain completely confidential until after the funds are secured." The room erupted again, louder than before. Journalists stood. From their seats, cameras flashed continuously and several committee members began talking all at once. Chairman Marshall's gavel couldn't restore order this time. The revelation was too explosive, too definitive. Thomas's face had gone completely. Still, a mask that revealed nothing while concealing everything. But the damage was done. The email was not just a smoking gun. It was a confession. When the chaos finally subsided enough for Bondi to continue, she did so with quiet authority. "Justice Thomas, this email was obtained legally through a separate investigation into offshore financial transactions conducted by the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was provided to this committee under subpoena yesterday." She let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "The SEC has confirmed its authenticity. Mr. Horowitz has confirmed its authenticity. And the metadata embedded in this document confirms that it originated from Mr. Horowitz's corporate account at exactly 2:17 p.m. on April the 10th. Thomas's attorney, who had been sitting silently beside him throughout the hearing, leaned over to whisper something urgently. Thomas gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Bondi continued, her voice now carrying a note of genuine regret. "Justice Thomas, I take no pleasure in this. None of us do. You have served this country for decades. You have shaped our legal landscape. You have inspired countless Americans." She paused, looking not just at Thomas now, but at the entire room, at the cameras broadcasting this moment to millions of homes across the country. But no one, not even a Supreme Court justice, is above the law. No one's personal financial interests should ever take precedence over the needs of the American people, and no one who betrays the public trust should remain in a position of such extraordinary power. With that, she turned to Chairman Marshall. "Mr. Chairman, in light of this evidence, I formally recommend that this committee refer this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation and to the House Judiciary Committee for consideration of impeachment proceedings." The word impeachment, almost never uttered in connection with a sitting Supreme Court justice, fell like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. This wasn't just an embarrassment or a political attack. This was history unfolding. In real time, a constitutional crisis triggered not by partisan warfare, but by documented evidence of corruption at the highest level of American government. And as Justice Clarence Thomas finally looked up, meeting Bondi's steady gaze across the room, both of them knew that everything had changed, not just for Thomas, not just for the court, but for a nation that had just witnessed the most profound breach of judicial trust in modern history. The formal part of the hearing had ended, but America's reckoning was just beginning. Outside the Capitol, crowds had gathered spontaneously as news of Bondi's revelations spread. They weren't the usual partisan protesters. These were ordinary citizens, stunned and outraged by what they'd just witnessed. Inside, as committee members filed out, reporters swarmed around Pam Bondi, shouting questions from every direction. She raised a hand, silencing them with a simple gesture. "I'll take questions at the appropriate time," she said calmly. "For now, I'll simply say this. Today isn't about triumph or vindication. It's about accountability. In a democracy, power flows from the people. When that trust is betrayed, there must be consequences. Regardless of title, regardless of position, regardless of legacy." Across the room, Justice Thomas was being escorted out by security, his expression unreadable, his future uncertain. The man who had shaped American jurisprudence for 3 decades was now facing the prospect of impeachment, criminal investigation, and the permanent tarnishing of his historical legacy. But the story didn't end with Thomas. It was about to explode far beyond him. Within hours, the shockwaves began to spread. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court issued an unprecedented emergency statement announcing the immediate formation of a judicial ethics review panel and the suspension of all non-essential court functions pending a full investigation. The White House promised complete cooperation with congressional investigations, while carefully avoiding any statements that might appear to prejudge the outcome. Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group of senators announced emergency legislation to create an independent oversight body for the Supreme Court, the first of its kind in American history. And in newsrooms across the country, investigative journalists who had been quietly tracking pieces of this story for months now rushed to publish what they knew, adding new dimensions to the scandal by the hour. By nightfall, the full scope was becoming clear. Thomas wasn't alone. 3 other justices had connections to entities that benefited from the redirected funds. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was systemic. The next morning, as America woke to headlines they never thought they'd see, Pam Bondi appeared on the steps of the Justice Department. Flanked by federal prosecutors and FBI officials, she announced the formation of a special task force to investigate judicial corruption. What began as an inquiry into one authorization has revealed patterns that demand comprehensive investigation, she stated, her voice steady and determined. The American people deserve to know if their highest court has been compromised, and, if so, to what extent. Behind her, a visual displayed the staggering numbers. $2.7 billion redirected from American communities to international entities, with troubling connections to Supreme Court justices and their families. This money was meant for schools in Detroit, she said, pointing to the first item on the list. $340 million that would have repaired buildings, hired teachers, and provided resources for children who have been failed by crumbling infrastructure.